Hi everyone, thank you for coming. So today we're going to talk about a tool which is called HashiCorp Vault, and which is something that we can use to have secrets management. So a few words about me. My name is Christophe Tafani de Reper. I work at Hacknowledge as a security engineer. So I do a few things from threat hunting to SOC analyst. I also do a bit of programming and some DevOps occasionally. So the goal of this talk is first to take a look at a few notions of HashiCorp Vault and what we can do with it, and then to take two real-world scenarios and see how it can help in these situations. So when we talk about secret management, we start often by defining what is a secret. So typically it's going to be something like an API key, a password, a TLS certificate key, or these kind of things. And if we take the academic definition, it's basically when you have a certain level of access. A secret is what allows you to escalate this access to something more privileged. So the typical situation is that we have some kind of secrets in our infrastructure, and they are on different locations in configuration files on machines, on engineers' laptops, in a lot of different places. So it's typically hard to know where the secrets are. It's also often hard to know who has access to them and in which way, with which restrictions. So it's hard to map your organizational policies to your technical implementation on how, by whom the secrets can be accessed. And so this is often a problem when you have a breach, meaning that you have an application or a network that gets compromised, and then you want to identify the entry point of the breach. So what happened, what application that was compromised accessed some particular secret, what can you do about it, how to revoke them. So this is kind of the questions that we want to be able to use with to answer with a solution like Vault. So the way Vault and typically all the similar solutions do it is by providing a centralized way to store the secrets, by having secrets that are as much as possible short-lived and revocable, and also to have some access controls lists that are based on roles, so that we can have users and applications access secrets in a kind of granular way. And also, last thing we want is some kind of audit trail that allow us to know when secrets are accessed by whom, and which allows us to have accountability for the secrets that are being used. So we're going to start with some concepts about Vault, how it approaches some different problems, and in the second part we'll take some scenarios and see how we can apply these concepts. So a bit of context about Vault. It's an open source project which is developed and maintained by HashiCorp. It's a company which is quite well known. They do some other tools like Terraform or Nomad, or these kind of things. It was released in April 2015, and it's under quite active development since then. And it's a tool which is mostly free, and it has some paid features for advanced enterprise users, but we're not doing a vendor presentation, so we're only going to look at the free features, which most of the time are enough for a lot of things. And the interface is mainly a REST API, and you have different language-specific libraries and some CLI tools that you can use to interact with Vault. So Vault is built around 4 pillars. We are going to see each one of them, starting from secret storage, so how the secrets are stored in some kind of storage, how users and applications authenticate to the Vault server, and what kind of secrets can be stored and managed, and finally what kind of auditing we can have. So about secret storage, when you have secrets, you want to store them somewhere. It can be on a disk, on any cloud location. So what Vault allows you to do is to choose a specific storage backend, which can be something like a file system or an Amazon S3 bucket, MySQL database, or anything. I mean, a lot of things. And the security model here is that the backend storage are untrusted. So it's in the conception that you shouldn't be able to compromise anything if you just compromise the underlying storage. So there are some additional precautions like authenticated encryption to make sure that you cannot tamper with the data, and things like it tries to disable swap when it runs, so it makes sure that nothing is swapped to disk and this kind of things. And then obviously if you have encrypted storage, the question is how do you decrypt the storage, right? Because if you just have an encrypted storage with the key lying next to it, it's pretty much pointless. So the way that Vault approaches it is by requiring human intervention at startup. So you go from this situation where you have Vault which cannot read its storage because it doesn't know the encryption key. And this is typically the case when you start it up. So when you restart it, it's going to be in this situation. And you are going to go through an unsealing process which is going to bring Vault in a situation where it has access and it can know the master key used to decrypt and encrypt the data. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about that, but essentially what it does is it takes the master encryption key and it's going to split it into multiple shares. And the principle is that you are going to distribute each one of these shares to individuals of your company. And then Vault is going to be able to reconstruct the encryption key with a certain number of shares. And this is done using the Shamir's secret sharing algorithm. So typically what you're going to do is something like you split the encryption key in 3 shares, you distribute it to 3 of your, sysadmins or CTO, and then you are able to give Vault 2 shares of the key to reconstruct it and be able to go back to the storage and decrypt it. So this is the way Vault approaches the secret storage. Now about authentication methods. So now we have Vault, which is in a state where it can read what's stored on disk or in the MySQL database. And we are going to have users and applications authenticate to it, because we want to provide authenticated access to Vault. We don't want anybody to be able to access anything in Vault. So authentication. So the clients authenticate to Vault using one of several available authentication methods. So typically you have things that are made for humans like LDAP authentication or Radius, GitHub, and these kind of things. And some other ones that are made for applications, things like app role, where you have your applications that have a secret role and a role ID and a role secret, and these kind of things. And then for authorization, so defining what level of access you want to give each user to Vault, you can define some policies in Vault, some ACLs that define which level of access you grant to each users or each entity. And then what you typically do is to configure the authentication method to map an external identity to specific policies in Vault. So the typical case is that you have a LDAP server with some organizational units, and you map each of these units to a certain set of permissions in Vault. So this is the high-level view of what it looks like, no matter what authentication method you use. You have the client which authenticates to Vault in a specific way depending on the method. Then the authentication method, so Vault returns a token, and this token is going to be used to interact with the Vault API later on, and it's bound to specific permissions. So each time the client is going to make a request to Vault, Vault is going to be able to check what are the permissions bound to this token, and if the client can perform the actions that it wants to perform. So we're going to see a quick example with GitHub authentication, just a practical example of how we can do it. So the context is that in GitHub you can create some organizations, and then you can create some teams inside these organizations and put some people inside teams. So this is an example with the Hack Knowledge organization in which there is an analyst team and an engineers team. And the goal here is to provide people in these teams the ability to access Vault with a certain permissions depending on the teams they are in. So the initial setup is that you create an ACL, what Vault calls a policy in Vault for your engineering team, which we have here. Then we enable the GitHub authentication method in Vault. And finally, we do the mapping that says, I want to give this level of permissions to the users from the engineering team. And then as a user, so if I'm inside any of these GitHub teams, I can just go to github.com, retrieve an access token for my account, give it to Vault, and then I'm authenticated to Vault and I can access everything that my permissions give me the rights to. So this is how we do it in a more concrete way. Using the CLI tool. So you start by writing a policy, which is named engineer's policy, and which grants some rights under certain secrets path. We gain some certain capabilities, and then we create it in Vault. So once we have done that, we enable the GitHub authentication engine in Vault. We say that we want to have users from the Acknowledge organization on GitHub. And finally, we do the mapping that says, I want that my team engineers is able to have this level of access, which corresponds to this policy in Vault. And then as a user, it's very easy to use. You can just type in the CLI Vault login with the GitHub method. You provide your access token, your GitHub access token. And then you get back a Vault token, which enables you to interact with Vault. And in the case of the CLI, it will use it automatically. And as we can see in the tokens policy field, we can see that our token is bound to the engineer's policy that we defined before. So this is kind of the way we do it. And once I am authenticated to Vault, I can start to read and write some data. So if I read something under static engineering secret, I will have the rights to do it because my policy allows me to do it explicitly. And if I read something else, the Vault policies are denied by default. So since my policy doesn't explicitly allow me to do it, it will be denied. So this is kind of the way we do authentication and authorization in Vault. You have some different authentication methods. You can enable many of them, and you do a mapping between an external identity, so things like a GitHub team or LDAP organizational unit. You do this mapping to a set of internal policies in Vault. Which brings us to the most interesting part, meaning secrets, right? We didn't yet speak about secrets, how we can manage them, how we can actually use them in Vault. So there are different kind of secret engines. Some are made for technology-specific stuff like MySQL, PostgreSQL. Some other ones are bound to specific cloud providers. So you have things to manage AWS secrets, Google Cloud secrets, and these kind of things. And we're going to see some of them a bit later. So it's a bit like in Linux, where everything is a path. In Vault, everything is a path as well, and you can mount secret engine under a certain path. So in this example, we are mounting the KV, so the key value secret engine on the path static, meaning that afterwards, once we have done it a single time as a Vault administrator, everything which will be under the path static will be managed by the Vault key value secret engine. Yeah, so the most basic secret engine in Vault is the key value secret engine, which basically allows you to write and read arbitrary key values data in Vault. It's not super exciting, but most of the time you need it. So I can write a certain set of key values to a certain secret path, and then if I can read it back, and I will get this data. So this is not a very exciting feature of Vault, and most of the power of Vault comes from the dynamic secret engine. And here, the principle is that you give Vault a certain level of access to a certain technology or platform, and then it's going to be able to dynamically generate some credentials. So for MySQL or PostgreSQL, it means that it's going to be able to dynamically create user accounts. For AWS, it's going to be able to generate IAM credentials on the fly. And for the PKI secret engine, it's going to be able to hold a CA certificate key and sign certificates on the fly and these kind of things. So here, the dynamic secrets are supposed to be short-lived. So your users or applications should need to go back to Vault every event or so to renew the secret, and then these secrets can be revoked easily by an operator. So the goal here is that nobody would be able to maybe steal your MySQL production database root password, because the credentials are bound in time and you can easily revoke them at the vault level, so they cannot be renewed. So to be a bit more practical, with an example for the MySQL secret engine. So here you give Vault a certain set of credentials which allows it to create user. And then you can have it dynamically generate MySQL credentials with specific rights. So things like read-only on the whole database or write-only on a single table. And as we said before, these credentials are limited in time and they can be revoked easily. This is kind of a situation, I mean the kind of workflow that we have. The user of the application is going to request some temporary read-only credentials to Vault. Maybe it's going to be read-only, maybe something else. Vault is going to create this user in MySQL with specific rights, and then it will get back to the user with these credentials. So if we want to do it using the CLI, there is, just like before, a one-time setup to enable the database secret engine. Then you have to configure Vault. So you give it some credentials to access your MySQL prod database, maybe. So you just give it basically a connection URL, a username and a password, just so that Vault can connect to this database and then create the appropriate user accounts. Then we create a role. So we say we want to create a role MySQL prod read-only, which is going to apply to the MySQL prod connection. And this is the way you should create users. So you just basically select on every table of every database, which means that this will create read-only users. And we give it the TTL that we want, in this case 10 minutes, which says I want you to create user accounts that are valid for 10 minutes. Then as a user or as an application, you can read back these credentials, meaning that when you do this, Vault is going to go to MySQL and create a user account dynamically for you. And you have then a username and a password that you can use to directly connect to MySQL. And just as a reminder, this is something that you can access only if you have a policy bound to your access token that can allow you to access it. So if we wanted to allow our engineering team on GitHub, to take the previous example, to access this, we would need to change their policy and to explicitly state that they are able to access DB cred MySQL prod read-only. So these credentials are going to be bound in time, and more generally, when we talk about dynamic secrets, we also talk about leases. And a lease is an information that says for how much longer the credentials are valid. In this case, it's going to be 10 minutes, and a flag that says if, in theory, we should be able to renew the credentials that we have. So then we can renew the credentials, depending on the case. We can renew them based on the lease ID, which uniquely identifies the lease. And we will get back some information that says that the renewal was successful, and we can use these credentials for 10 more minutes. So obviously you can also revoke user accounts. So you can revoke leases. So in this case, if I want to revoke the lease, I can just revoke it by ID, which will make the MySQL credentials invalid. And I can also revoke them by prefix. So if I want to revoke all the MySQL credentials that were ever generated by Vault for this role, I can just use something like this. And so here the goal is really to be able to have short-lived MySQL user accounts that applications or users can go and renew periodically, and to give the administrators, the operators, maybe your security team, the ability to easily revoke these credentials. So if somebody revokes a lease like that, when the user or the application is going to try to connect to MySQL, it will not work anymore. So as we said before, you don't have the risk anymore that somebody is going to steal your MySQL root password, and that you're not sure who did it, you're not sure. So this gives it, okay. Which brings us to the last pillar of Vault, auditing. So, Vault basically has an audit log, which allows it to log every request and response that are made. And typically what we will do is to send this log to a centralized log management system, to OCM, maybe to Splunk, to Greylog, to something like that. And once we have it, we can do some things like some anomaly detection. We can see when users are trying to log in with wrong authentication information. We can see if we have some authenticated users that are trying to access things that they should not access. We can do logs correlation. So if you see a user account which is doing something weird on Vault and on another system, you can maybe take some actions. And then we can also do something like honey secrets with Vault. And here the concept is that you give an application a certain set of accesses. So maybe they're going to be able to access what they need to function, plus another secret, which is going to be a honey secret, which shouldn't ever be accessed. And then you also have to grant the application some rights to read the policy that it has. And the goal here is that if somebody accesses this secret, it means that likely it's an attacker that has compromised the application and is trying to enumerate the rights that it has in Vault and to read everything that it can. So this is the kind of things that can be interesting to implement with Vault auditing. Okay, so now a bit of hands-on. So we're going to see two scenarios. The first one is around SSH access management. So here, the concept, the context is that you have a bunch of Linux machines, and typically you want to give some group of people a certain level of access via SSH to these machines, and you want to do it in a scalable way, meaning that you don't want to create one user account per machine per employee. You don't want to have to bundle all the public keys of all your employees on all the machines. So typically you're down to two solutions, PAM, so pluggable authentication modules of OpenSSH, and we can also use the Vault SSH secret backend. And this is the solution that we are going to see. So here the concept is that you have Vault holding a SSH CA certificate, and it can actually sign users' public key using this certificate. And you set up a trust relationship between the Linux servers that run OpenSSH and Vault, meaning that any user can ask Vault to sign its key and then go to the server and show the certificate, which will be accepted because you have a trust relationship between the machine and Vault. So to make it a bit clearer, you have your server running OpenSSH, which trusts the CA certificate of Vault. And then Vault can use its CA private key to sign users' public key. And when they do so, users get back SSH certificate, so a signed public key, essentially. And they can present it to the server to authenticate. So what is neat with that is that it's a feature which is built into OpenSSH. So you don't have any additional software to install on the machines. And since the signatures are done offline, you don't need to have any communication between the servers and Vault. So you can typically have Vault and the machines running into different subnets. You don't need to open any firewall ports or these kind of things. So this is the way we do it very practically. You start by enabling the SSH secrets engine in Vault. Then you tell Vault to generate a CA certificate. So it's going to it's going to generate a CA key and a CA certificate, and it's going to return the certificate, and the key will only be stored in Vault in this case. Then on all the Linux machine where you want to provide SSH access, you can just change single OpenSSH configuration option, which says that you want to trust this Vault CA certificate to authenticate users. And then we can configure roles in Vault, which essentially grant a certain level of access over SSH. So typically it's going to say that you want to allow to connect as a certain set of users. Here maybe it's going to be developer and Tomcat. You're going to ask for a TTL of 10 minutes. So the signatures made by Vault should only be valid for 10 minutes. And then you can add some restrictions, things like if you want to restrict from where the connections are coming, or if you want to enable port forwarding, these kind of things. And once you have done that, So this is a one-time setup, just to make it clear. This is something that typically an administrator would do a single time. Once this is set up, as a user, I can use the Vault CLI, ask Vault to sign my public key for this SSH role that we defined just before. And if I have the rights to access this path, so SSH signed developer, Vault will give me my signed SSH key, which is basically a SSH certificate that I will be able to use to SSH into the machine. So you have two steps, and if you are lazy, you can use the Vault SSH wrapper, which basically does the same but allows you to do that in a single command. So there is another way to use Vault for SSH access, but we are not going to talk about it. Basically, it involves installing an agent on all the servers, so it's a bit harder to deploy, but it works as well. So as we said before, we set the TTL of 10 minutes. So after 10 minutes, the certificate that we show will be refused because it's not valid anymore. And so this raises the question of what TTL should you use? And it's always a trade-off between basically performance, stability, and ease of revocation, because here the signatures are made offline. So you have no easy way to revoke a signature which is made by Vault. So if you use a TTL which is too high, then it means that you cannot revoke easily. But then if you set a very low TTL, like 10 seconds, it means that every time you want to connect to the machine, you need to ask Vault for a signature. So it really depends on the use case. If your users are rarely SSHing on machines, that it can be a good idea to set a low TTL. Otherwise, something like 1 day would be reasonable, I guess. Second use case would be, how do we authenticate applications? So it turns out that authenticating humans is easy, right? Because we have a brain. If we go to sleep one night, we can remember hopefully our password the next day. But for applications, it's even not very clear what defines an application, right? Is it the process in which the application runs? Is it the machine on where it runs? So it's kind of tricky. And we're going to see how we can, two ways that we can do it with Vault, but it's not specifically bound to Vault, and it applies to other technologies as well. So our requirements that we want to be able to automatically deploy applications. So we just don't want to have somebody run some commands in a machine to deploy applications. And we want that every application has a dedicated policy that allows it to only access these their own secrets, right? If you have a credit card service and a marketing service, you don't want that the marketing service is able to access the credit card secrets. So most of the time, Vault has a building block to build that. It's called app role authentication, but it's only a method, so it doesn't allow you to have a complete workflow. So you have to build a workflow from that. And basically the app role authentication works this way. You can create a role for applications which have a role ID and a secret ID. And if an application provides that to Vault, it can get back a token and then use it to talk with Vault. But obviously the question is, how does the application initially get the secret ID, right? So one solution would be to hardcode it in the virtual machine or in the container where it runs. But you still have to get it first. So how do you put it there? And then it doesn't work with things like immutable infrastructure. So if you are using Kubernetes, it's going to recreate the containers every time. So it won't work. Same thing goes if you're using AWS and you're just shutting down instances and deploying new ones. So it's not really a good solution. Second option would be have a CI or CD system like Jenkins or maybe GitLab CI inject this secret ID in the virtual machine or in the container when it deploys the application. It can be a good idea, but then how do you authenticate the CI, CD to Vault? So it's basically the chicken and egg problem. So we have two solutions. The first one has some requirements, but it's most likely the best one. And it's what Vault calls platform integration. And it basically when your applications run in a platform where they have some identity which is provided by the platform. So this is the case when you run in AWS. You have things like AWS instance role, which gives your application an identity, which is cryptographically signed by AWS, and which they can easily show to some other party to prove that they are indeed this application. For Kubernetes, this would be a different name, but the same principle. You have a pod service account, and at runtime, Kubernetes is going to inject a JWT inside a path in the container. So the point here is that some platforms like AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, Kubernetes, and probably some other ones give a way for applications to prove their identity in an easy and secure way, because the platform says that this is maybe the credit card application which runs this certain version of the application. And in Vault, we can have some authentication engines which allow applications to authenticate using their platform-specific identity. So typically, you're going to be able to set up IAM authentication in Vault for application, and you're going to say maybe I want that my credit card service is able to access this kind of secrets, and then the credit card application can prove its identity in a simple way. So in AWS is going to be by just making an API call to AWS, and then this is the way you do it. So it's easy to use in a kind of workflow. You don't have a lot to do, but it has a lot of restrictions, because if you don't use something like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, or Kubernetes, you cannot use that. So we have to find something else, but this is probably the best solution if you can use it. So this is how it works. You have your application, which run in a certain platform. You have Vault, and you have what I call the platform control plane, which is going to be maybe the AWS API, the Kubernetes API, or whatever. And then the application is going to retrieve its platform-specific identity, which can be easily verified. So in AWS, it's going to be signed by AWS. It's going to give it to Vault in order to authenticate. Vault is going to maybe check the signature, make an API call to make sure that the application is who it says it is. And then it's going to map this identity to some policies, just like we did in our example for GitHub, and give back the application a token which it's going to be able to use to talk to Vault. So this is our first option for application authentication, and it's the best when we can do it, but we cannot always do it, right? If we have applications that run in virtual machines in an on-premise EX6i cluster, then there is no way that VMware gives virtual machines a way to prove their identity, so we have to find something else. As a reminder, the problem we're trying to solve is how do we pass the secret ID to the applications so that they can authenticate to Vault using that. It turns out it's a pretty challenging problem. There is no one solution which is better. It's highly dependent on the technologies that we use, where the application run. But we can try to do a few things like on a pretty high level to grasp the concept. So one option is called the trusted orchestrator. It's the HashiCorp terminology. So this is basically when you extend your trust to an additional component, something like Jenkins or GitLab CI, which is going to deploy your applications. And we call that the orchestrator. I'm not super convinced about the terminology, but let's stick to that. And here you have your authenticator, your orchestrator, which is authenticated to Vault. So it makes some requests to Vault. And the goal is that it's able to pass the app role secret ID to the application when it deploys it. Okay. So the way we can do it, for instance, is by having an orchestrator which can only retrieve the application secret ID. So we only give it the rights on this path, which says basically, I want you to be able to read the secret ID from the application, but you cannot read any secret. So you won't be able to read anything from the application secrets. Then we put it inside a different network than the application it deploys, and we'll see why in a few seconds. And then we have our applications authenticate with Vault using a dedicated app role. So they have a dedicated role that says what secrets they are allowed to access. And then we can configure the app role with some restrictions on from where the secret ID can be used to authenticate. So we say we can only use it to authenticate from the application network, which is in a different subnet than the orchestrator. So this is what we have. We have a network zone, a subnet, or whatever with the orchestrator. So Jenkins, GitLab CI, something like that. We have another network zone with our application. This shouldn't be here, so you can just cross it in your mind. So you have your orchestrator that reads the secret ID from Vault. Okay. Vault is going to get it back to the orchestrator. Then the orchestrator is going to deploy the application and pass the secret ID to the application. Then the application will authenticate to Vault using the role ID and the secret ID, which it has just gotten from the orchestrator. And it can then talk to Vault in a secure way. It can access its secrets and this kind of things. So this is a nice solution because applications can only access what their app role allows you to read. So you have compartmentalization between your applications. The orchestrator cannot access the application secrets because it can only read the secret ID. So, okay. It cannot authenticate with the secret ID of the application because we set some restrictions on the app role. So we cannot log in using the app role from the orchestrator subnet. We can only log in from this network. But we still have something bad is that if we compromise the orchestrator, we can deploy basically a backdoored application, right? We can just say, hey, I want to deploy an application which is going to authenticate to Vault because it's in the app subnet, and then it's going to leak the secrets on Passbin. So maybe we can do better. And here, the problem in our previous model is that the orchestrator has the total control over the application node where the application is running. So the answer is we need to have some interfaces between the orchestrator and the application node because we don't want that the orchestrator is able to deploy anything. So a potential solution is to have an additional component which we call the orchestrator client, and basically you have your orchestrator server like before, and you have your application node. On the node you have a client-side orchestrator which is going to so you're going basically to have this flow. You're going to have a daemon which runs on the application node. The orchestrator server is going to deploy the application to trigger a new deployment and to pass a secret ID. And then basically on the client side, on the application node side, you're going to have this client pull the applications, authenticate to Vault using this information and the role ID. And typically the role ID, you could bundle it in the application source code because it's not sensitive information. And then it can pass the Vault token to the application. So hopefully this makes kind of sense. It's a bit high level because it's going to be very dependent on the technologies that we use, but typically this can be implemented with something like configuration management systems that have a client-side agents, things like SaltStack or Chef, for instance. This was shown in a presentation in AppSec USA 2015. And so here we got something better because our orchestrator cannot deploy backdoored applications anymore. It can only trigger a new deployment. It cannot choose what it wants to deploy. The orchestrator still has to authenticate to Vault to retrieve this secret ID initially. But we made compromising the orchestrator much less interesting because now it cannot access any secrets from the application and it can only trigger a new deployment. So basically you can just hardcode the Vault token of the orchestrator on the server because even if it's compromised, it has a low privilege over the overall architecture. Some potential improvements that we could have is with something called response wrapping. We're not going to have the time to deep into it, but I will put it in the slides that I will release afterwards. So that concludes our two scenarios. There are some other cool features that we won't have the time to discuss, but I would like to mention a few. So first one is the Transit Secret Backend. It's basically encryption as a service. So you can have Vault hold an encryption key, which is going to only be stored in Vault, and you're going to have applications that use Vault as an interface for encryption and decryption. And this is good because this means that nobody can can steal an encrypted database and the key and decrypt it offline. So you're going to be able to detect if somebody is trying to decrypt a high number of records in a database, which shouldn't be normal. Then you have a PKI secrets backend when you can have Vault hold the CA key and act as a certification authority. And you can have users that ask Vault, hey, can you sign this certificate for this host? And this allows you to have a centralized way to manage certificates. You can have the audit log, so you can know who signed which certificate when, and you can have some ACLs on that as well. There is a high availability mode, so you can run multiple Vault nodes. You have one master, you have some other replicas which are standby, which replicate the changes of the master. So if you lose the master, another node is going to be elected, so you can run this way. And since a few months ago, there is a web UI, which is the official one. It used to be part of the paid features, but now they released it, so it's very nice if you want to configure Vault in a graphic way. So we just spent 42 minutes praying Vault, but obviously it has some limitations. So first one being that the unsealing process is hard to automate, because typically when you restart Vault or when you start it up, there are some manual interaction required. You have to have multiple people providing their share of the master key, so it's hard to automate. And the way to automate it is most of the time using an HSM, so it's pretty expensive and hard to do, although you can do it. Another issue is that it can easily become a single point of failure. If you have just one Vault node and you are using it to maybe SSH to your machines, it means that if you lose it, you cannot SSH anymore. So depending on how you use it, it's probably a good idea to have several nodes. But obviously this adds some complexity, so you have to choose very well what you do with it. Maybe you can have a Vault instance to manage SSH, another one to manage application secrets, and these kind of things. And another limitation is that not all secrets can be dynamic. So most of the time you're going to have to put into Vault some secrets that you cannot rotate easily in Vault, that you cannot revoke easily. Maybe if you have an API, you have to store an API key in Vault, and if you want to revoke it, you're going to have to go to the provider of the API and revoke it in a different way. So it doesn't always work. So some alternatives. There are some provider dependent solutions, things like Amazon KMS, Google Cloud KMS, Azure Key Vault. Most of the time they are good solutions, but obviously you have the risk of vendor lock-in. Just it was outlined this morning. If you use that in your applications, it means that it's hard to move to another cloud, because if your application is deeply integrated in AWS KMS, then it's hard to move it somewhere else. And also, I don't think this provides things like dynamic secret generation for other things than the platform they are in. Another alternative is obviously HSMs, hardware security modules. So it's basically more expensive. It's hardware, so you have to buy the hardware to place it in a data center and these kind of things. And typically HSM makes more sense if you have regulatory requirements. Maybe if you have PCI compliance, you need to have an HSM where probably it makes sense, but they are expensive. And there are other ways that you can use HSM with Vault. Typically there are some people that store the unsealing key, so the master encryption key of Vault in an HSM. So that Vault can unseal itself, but you cannot have the encryption key, so it can be used in conjunction. And finally, there are some other software solutions. The two most well-known are Square's Kiwis and Pinterest Nox. There are also good solutions, I think. I don't know them in detail, but it's mainly to handle static secrets. So typically, you're not going to be able to have dynamic secret generation. So depending on your use case, depending where your application runs, depending if you need to have dynamic secrets or not, depending if you need some kind of compliance, these plus Vault are kind of the landscape of secret management today. There are a few links to some presentations I liked. And the first one is a brand new website. I think it was released like 2 or 3 weeks ago. And it's basically a learning center where there are some small guides about Vault. So it's a very good resource if you want to play around with it a little bit. I will release the slides in a few minutes. I will post them on Twitter. I just have to change the arrow that was bugged. And so thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions, and if you want to discuss anything, just email or Twitter. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Christoph, for this very complete presentation. We have time for a couple of questions. Yep.
How easy is it to extend Vault?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Which language is it written? Or?
Yeah. So you can write some custom authentication modules and some custom secret engines. You have an API in Go with which you can do it. So basically you can write them in Go, and then at startup you can configure Vault to use a custom module. Yeah, and I didn't test it. I wanted to try it with Greylog in order to have like dynamic secret generation for Greylog. So you can ask for a user account being generated that is valid for a certain amount of time. It seems to be quite simple, but it's Go. So if you have some experience in Go, probably it's easy. Otherwise you have the learning curve of Go. But yeah.
I have a question in terms of scale. If you extend the number of user rights and applications that are onboarded, then because this kind of authorization are heavily used, like in terms of performance, do you have some?
So I don't have much experience running Vault in a like very high performance setup. I think some optimizations that you could do is not to have a single Vault instance if you can. Maybe split it depending on what you do with it, depending on which network it has to be in. And otherwise, I know the enterprise version has some things like multiple masters. So probably if you do it for like, I don't know, for a high number of users and you have several thousand requests per second, maybe looking at the enterprise version could make sense. But I don't know how it behaves with high load. Yeah.
Thank you. Can you complexify the authorization method to, for instance, interface with ServiceNow or this kind of things to check if there's an incident that already creates for this specific host, and only then you will provide the secret, for instance, for an SSH connection?
Good question. I don't think that's done out of the box, but since you can build custom authentication modules, I guess you could do it like to make a custom check and then reuse the functionalities of the SSH secret engine, for instance. So it's not done out of the box. I think it would be very custom, so hard to do it for a large number of users, but you can definitely do it, yeah.
We have time for one more question.
I wanted to ask how can Vault interact with the user? Are there like mail integrations, chatbot integrations that are available to use, or does that require extra development work?
So the only interface is the main interface is the REST API. So you have some programming libraries that you can use, but the main tool I think for users are the CLI. So there is no chatbot integration or whatsoever that I know of, but you can build it pretty easily because it's just a REST API. So it would be actually a nice project idea, but then maybe it's not applicable for all kind of secrets. But yeah, it could be done.
Okay. Thank you very much again.